As I've shared with a number of you in recent days, this conference is extraordinary. Not only have the speakers and attendees come here from across the globe, but they also hail from a range of different disciplines, from education and psychology to history and philosophy and beyond. They also come from a wide range of educational institutions and positions, including renowned university scholars and researchers, elementary and secondary public school teachers, secondary and post-secondary administrators, and educationally minded parents and other community members. There aren't that many people in this room, but all those groups really are represented here. But even this doesn't really begin to capture what's most unique and interesting about the conference. To help you appreciate that, I'll need to provide some relevant background and context, which is the main thing I intend to do in these opening remarks. And if I didn't read the text, it would take me at least twice as long. So I hope you can bear with me on that. After setting the context, I'll also make several announcements regarding various practical and logistical matters. Then we'll move immediately into the first of our 4 plenary sessions. So, here we go. Intellectual virtues are the character traits of a good thinker, learner, or inquirer. They include curiosity, attentiveness, open-mindedness, intellectual autonomy, intellectual humility, and intellectual tenacity. Underlying this way of thinking about intellectual virtues is the somewhat radical, albeit also extremely plausible idea that a good thinker or learner involves more, that good thinking and good learning involves more than having a high IQ, knowing lots of facts, or possessing a range of intellectual skills. It's also a matter of being a certain type of person, one who wonders, asks penetrating questions, is aware of and not afraid to own her intellectual limits, attends to important details, demands evidence when appropriate, can think for herself, and manifests grit and perseverance in her attempts to reach the truth. Surprisingly, it wasn't until quite recently that philosophers and other authors began to identify intellectual character and intellectual virtues as a reasonably discrete dimension of personal character. Or, traditionally, both theoretical and popular discussions of character, virtue, and related concepts have tended to be discussions of moral or civic virtue, of traits like compassion and generosity, tolerance and community-mindedness. However, while intellectual virtue is tied up with moral and civic virtue in various ways, it's not reducible to either of these other dimensions. Put simply, we can think of moral virtues as the character traits of a good neighbor, civic virtues as the character traits of a good citizen, and intellectual virtues, again, as the character traits of a good thinker or inquirer. This relative inattention to matters of intellectual character and virtue began to change in the 1990s with, among other events, the advent of virtue epistemology, which is a subfield of philosophy that gives special attention to intellectual virtues in its attempt to better understand knowledge and related cognitive goods. Philosopher Linda Zagzebski's 1996 book, Virtues of the Mind, was an important landmark in this regard, offering as it did the first robust theory of intellectual virtues and vices understood as character traits. Of similar importance within the field of education is Ron Richart's 2001 book, Intellectual Character, What It Is, Why It Matters, and How to Get It, as well as decades of excellent work on educating for open-mindedness by the philosopher of education William Baehr. One striking feature of intellectual character, in contrast with other more familiar dimensions of character, is its obvious application and importance to educational theory and practice. This is not to deny that we can and should also attempt to educate for growth in moral and civic virtues. Rather, the point is that it is even clearer that we should educate for growth in traits like curiosity, intellectual humility, intellectual autonomy, attentiveness, open-mindedness, and intellectual perseverance. Indeed, a similar, if often inchoate, claim lies at the heart of many educational mission statements upholding the importance of turning students into lifelong learners or fostering a genuine love of learning. For intellectual virtues have their basis in a love of knowledge or learning, and they simply are the personal qualities or character traits of a lifelong learner. One worthy and timely project, then, is to probe more deeply into how exactly growth in intellectual virtues figures relative to the proper aims and goals of education, and how exactly to design educational environments and instructional practices so as to promote this goal. This is precisely one of the central aims of this conference. Now, as many sitting in this room know, expanding our knowledge in this way might lead us to try to reinvent the wheel. For, while explicit attention to the language and concepts of intellectual character and intellectual virtue in particular has been somewhat rare within education, there's a great deal of existing research that sheds very important and useful light on the value of intellectual virtues and on the sorts of educational practices that can be used to foster growth in these traits. This is research on qualities, skills, and activities that are very closely related to intellectual virtues, including, 1, research within character education on how to foster growth in moral and civic virtues. 2, work in the philosophy of education and educational psychology on critical thinking. 3, research conducted mainly through Harvard's Project Zero on so-called thinking dispositions. There are other bodies of research that we could talk about here as well. So moral and civic virtues, critical thinking, and thinking dispositions are sufficiently similar to or connected with intellectual virtues, such that much of what has been said or argued in connection with trying to educate for those strengths is equally relevant and applicable to the project of trying to educate for intellectual virtues. Therefore, if we wish to better understand the importance of and best practices associated with educating for intellectual virtues, we would do very well to pay very close attention to the research in these other areas. Accordingly, another central aim of the conference has been to give scholars in each of the areas just identified an opportunity to begin to connect the dots between intellectual virtue on the one hand and various closely related and overlapping qualities and practices on the other. While the conference has only just begun, I think it can already be considered a smashing success in this regard. For we have here with us some of the most esteemed and accomplished scholars in each of these areas. Each of our plenary speakers is a renowned expert. Forgot to switch to that slide there. There you have it. And there you go. Each of our plenary speakers is a renowned expert in one of the 4 areas I have highlighted. I've already mentioned Linda Zagzebski's groundbreaking and extremely influential philosophical work on the nature and structure of intellectual virtues. Shari Tishman of Harvard's Project Zero conducted some of the earliest and best research on thinking dispositions. Harvey Siegel is a leading expert on critical thinking and education. And Marvin Berkowitz is one of the foremost experts on character education. It has also been important to us, however, that the conference not be a merely academic or theoretical exercise, that we also have presenters with hands-on experience in deliberately teaching for intellectual virtues, and other attendees interested in learning more about what exactly this looks like or entails. To this end, the program includes several praxis sessions aimed at shedding light on the sorts of exercises and practices that can be used to promote intellectual character growth in an educational setting. These sessions will be led by a mix of university professors, administrators, and elementary and secondary teachers. As this brief overview suggests, the conference is aimed at expanding our knowledge of both the theory and practice behind educating for intellectual virtues. It does so by marshaling the experience and expertise of educators and scholars from a wide range of disciplines and backgrounds. But even this is an incomplete account of what's distinctive about the event. For the conference also occupies an important role within a broader project aimed at advancing our understanding of the relationship between intellectual virtues and education. And this is the Intellectual Virtues and Education Project, a 3-year research and implementation project sponsored by a generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation. The Intellectual Virtues and Education Project has 2 main dimensions. The first involves a series of activities taking place here at LMU and involving several scholars and teachers. These activities include a week-long academic workshop that took place last summer and brought together several leading scholars in education, psychology, and philosophy, all but one of whom are here and will be presenting at the conference. It also involves this conference and an edited book volume on the conference topic, a 2-year series of seminars with a cohort of 15 local elementary and secondary teachers, the development of a comprehensive curriculum for implementing an intellectual virtues focus in an educational setting, and a website that will host a range of theoretical and practical resources related to intellectual virtues and education. The second dimension of the project involves the implementation of an intellectual virtues educational framework within a new grade 6 through 8 charter school in Long Beach, California. For several years, a number of families in Long Beach, including my own, have been working to develop a middle school that would have as its overarching focus the goal of fostering meaningful growth in intellectual character virtues. Last fall, the charter for the aptly named Intellectual Virtues Academy of Long Beach was approved by the Long Beach Unified School District, and the school is set to open this September with 2 6th grade classes. The grant provides over $600,000 of bridge funding for the school. Just as importantly, however, the school will benefit tremendously from the scholarly and other grant-sponsored events taking place here at LMU, including some of the research and scholarship that was produced for this conference. Therefore, in addition to advancing our theoretical and practical understanding of what it is to educate for intellectual virtues, this gathering will also have an immediate impact in the life of several local public school students. Well, I hope this gives you a sufficient context for understanding what the conference is about and why you haven't wasted your time by coming here. Again, I want to thank you for your participation. For many of you, preparing for the conference has required moving beyond familiar concepts and categories into new theoretical and practical territory. And I commend and am grateful for your intellectual courage and intellectual perseverance. I'll add that putting the conference program together was simultaneously thrilling and excruciating. I was thrilled to see the notions of intellectual character and intellectual virtue being approached from so many different angles and being appropriated in so many different interesting ways. But I was also pained very early on in the process by the fact that I wouldn't be able to attend all of the sessions. Some of you, when you look at the program, probably feel the same way. Just to let you know, we will be asking for your permission following the conference to post your papers and presentations on the conference website at least for a certain period of time. So I hope to overcome that problem. A few more words of thanks are in order. First, I'd like to thank the John Templeton Foundation for the generous funding that made this conference and the broader project of which it is a part possible. Second, I'd like to recognize Professor Steve Porter of Loyola University. Where's Steve? There's Steve. Steve is one of the other founders of the charter school, and it was he, not I, who came up with the initial vision for the Intellectual Virtues and Education Project, a vision that he promptly handed to me to execute, like in a matter of seconds, in the course of one short conversation. Third, a very special thanks goes to my graduate assistant, Nathaniel Curry. Nathaniel, are you in here? He's probably not in here because he's out there working. Who did the vast majority of heavy lifting involved with planning the conference. Those of you who have organized events like this understand the value of an assistant who is competent and responsible and hardworking and professional. And Nathaniel has displayed these and other qualities in spades in the many months leading up to the conference. I'm extremely grateful to him for all the work that he's poured into the events. And you can tell him I said that when you see him out and about.